Order, order. Hello everyone, my name is Michael Hope and I am the Chairman of the British Youth Council's Youth Select Committee. I'd like to welcome the witnesses for coming along to this first oral evidence session. Over recent years, the debate regarding the voting age has reignited in part due to the reduction of the voting age to 16 for the independence referendum in Scotland. The purpose of this Select Committee is to review both sides of the argument for and against the reduction of the voting age to 16. In addition, we will assess other factors such as youth political engagement, political parties' views on young people and citizenship education. May I ask that all present ensure that mobile phones are turned on silent, and if on silent, please engage with the debate on Twitter using the hashtag YouthSelect. A particular welcome to our first set of witnesses, and please can you introduce themselves, starting with Natasha.
Hi, my name is Natasha De-Freitas and I'm Head of Youth Action at London Youth. London Youth is a youth organisation representing 400 youth clubs across the capital, and we work with 75,000 young people a year.
I'm Alex George from the Scout Association and I chair our delegation to the British Youth Council. So the Scouts is an organisation of 500,000 people in the UK, representing 400,000 young members across the UK.
Good morning guys, my name's Hassan. I'm from UK Youth Voice, which is the steering group of UK Youth. We have 2 elected members from each region representing young people from across our regions.
I'm Hassan Abu-Bakir, Youth Work and Policy Coordinator at UK Youth. UK Youth is a large voluntary youth organisation that represents members across the UK, and we reach approximately 693,000 people across the UK.
Thank you very much. I would like to pass you on to Philip for our first question.
Can you briefly explain the work your organisations do with young people to help them contribute to society? We start with Natasha and work across.
So, as I said, we are a membership organisation of 400 youth clubs, but we also do direct delivery with young people. So we place an importance on different activities like sporting activities, outdoor education, but something that's hugely important to London Youth is our social youth action. We have projects such as Build It and VIY, which is about encouraging young people who are probably the furthest from the job market into picking up trade skills. So in VIY we work with 14 to 17-year-olds to develop DIY skills, and they redo community spaces and youth clubs alongside older mentors. With Build It, the young people will work with paid trade mentors, and they will do up former derelict houses. We believe both of those projects are really great because it's young people really getting involved in their community and really understanding a lot of the issues that go around not just unemployment but around housing and community cohesion. We then also have what we would call our key social action projects. So one is Urban Nature, where we encourage young people to take action on environmental issues, and Athens 31, which builds a sense of social responsibility by encouraging young people to take issue on create their own projects dealing with social issues in their community.
Thank you very much.
We also have Dare London, which is our youth advisory board, and we work with 16 to 25-year-olds who get involved in all aspects of our organisation and make decisions, and also feed up to policymakers as well.
Thank you. Alex?
So Scouting's recently launched a new vision, so we have a new strategic plan out at the moment, and we've kind of outlined what we're going to look at doing before 2018. So in that vision we have a specific focus on community impact. So an example of that we already do, we have something called Scout Community Week. So at the beginning of June, over 3,000 Scout groups in the UK all took part in social action initiatives in local areas where they live. So it gives young people the opportunity to try and change things themselves at a local level without needing any help or assistance from a national level. And as a result of the community impact, we're going to put in place a UK Youth Commissioner. So we're going to have a young person that's going to sit on the board alongside our current Chief Commissioner, Board of Trustees and Chairman and CEO. And we're going to try and make the organisation more youth-led. So currently we don't necessarily have any structures in place that would formally allow young people to kind of have their say, but we're definitely kind of on track to meet those targets.
Thank you. And Wasim?
Yeah, so UK Youth Voice is a steering group of UK Youth, which is a charity that has 39 regional youth associations representing 5,500 youth clubs and also almost 700,000 young people across the country. UK Youth Voice have positions on the UK Youth Trustee Board. We have 3 representatives from UK Youth Voice sitting on the board. We also have a vice chair. So the vice chair of the UK Youth vice chair is from UK Youth Voice. We represent our local areas, our regional areas we're elected from, and then we're going to do work within our local areas that UK Youth Voice has associations with. So for instance, I'm from Birmingham. If Birmingham had an activity on, I would represent them as West Midlands representatives.
Great. Hassan?
Obviously, Wasim's covered UK Voice. UK Youth, we're primarily an organisation which historically has been focused on providing young people with non-formal learning opportunities. So we run a series of accreditations and qualifications for young people, our flagship being the Youth Achievement Awards. We've also sort of branched out over the last 5 years. So following on from what Natasha said, we're also very much involved in the Youth Social Action Agenda. We run corporate programs along with our partners Microsoft, Starbucks, Barclays and O2. We're part of the O2 Think Big Forum. We also focus on trying to bring young people who have been excluded from mainstream education back into education through a series of Youth Achievement Foundations, alternative provision schools. And we're very much focused on trying to, obviously the youth unemployment agenda is very high on the agenda for young people, so we're launching a corporately funded employability programme, trying to bring young people and give them the skills to succeed in life and for a better future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to pass you to Brandon for our second question.
This question that I've got is for Alex, George and Wasim only. We'd like to ask the young people, why did you get involved with these programmes? If we start with Wasim and then go to Alex.
Before I joined UK Youth Voice, I was doing work with Sanke Shadow Youth Cabinet, which is with the local council shadowing the cabinet members. This was very local work, just locally focused on the council, but I wanted to branch out and do some national work, get out with national members and do something that will make a difference nationally, because I mean locally we're limited to what we can do. I saw UK Youth Voice as an opportunity. I took the opportunity and I've been successful in getting onto the board and hopefully now been elected as chair of UK Youth Voice. So it's about climbing the ladder and making that next step to making your voice heard on a different platform.
Thank you. Alex?
Really just echo kind of what Wasim said, so it's about making a difference. So I've been in scouting since I was 6 years old, so I've kind of come up through the ranks and was fortunate enough to come across the opportunity to go to the party conference. So Scouts hosts events at the political party conferences each year, so I went along in 2011 and off the back of that applied to be part of the British Youth Council delegation, and I'm also a young leader. Well, I was a young leader, started off as a young leader, I'm now an official proper leader. And I just kind of want to influence the work that the organisation does on a national level. I think you are kind of limited what you can do at a local level, and particularly as a result of the vision, it's good to see scouting heading in a different direction, maybe trying to change things that we know, because we have a large potential, we have a large number of young people that we can reach in the UK, and I really just want to try and give each and every one of them the opportunity that I've kind of had to make a difference.
Thank you. Jack has the next question.
So this is the whole panel. What do you think it means to be an engaged citizen? And we'll start with Hassan.
Being an engaged citizen, I believe, is someone who feels included. It's all about inclusion. You have an idea of social responsibility. You want to give something back to your community. You feel as if you're part of the conversation. I mean, as an organisation, what we are trying to achieve is to ensure that young people are engaged and are part of the process, and that we give them the skills to succeed in further life. Education isn't just about going to school; it's about everything that you experience as a young person. So, trying to bring people into the conversation and ensure that their voices are heard and that they're skilled is part of that process, I think.
Yeah, so just like what Hassan says, it's about being included into something that you believe in. If you have a vision, if you have an aim, and if you're part of that organisation that shares that beliefs, that's been engaged. 50% of what we learn is in schools. So what happens to that 85% that we're doing outside of schools? doing voluntary work, that's not been accredited the way it should be accredited, like GCSEs and A-levels are. So being engaged is making a difference, and make sure that the organisations that you're working with share the same visions and views as you do.
Yeah, so following up on what's already been said, I think being engaged is about having the opportunity to fulfil the kind of goals that you have. I think you've got to understand the process, you've got to understand what goes on. As has already been said, like non-formal education is really important. So at the moment, it's quite restricted in terms of academic qualifications and looking at what people do in school. But I think all of the organisations here offer something extra, give young people a chance to do something that they wouldn't necessarily get to do otherwise. And so being engaged would be giving young people a chance to kind of fulfil their kind of potential.
I can't really add that much because I think the panel's answered the question very well. I would talk about social responsibility and a real understanding of the wider world and the community, and feeling that you understand the role you can play in making an impact upon that. I think a lot of it does come down to confidence and agency, and I think that's something, again, the organisations here really strongly believe in, and try and carry out different ways to build young people's confidence, because you might have the understanding or the knowledge that you feel that you can go and take part in something, but unless you've got the confidence and the belief in yourself that you're able to do that, which it just might not happen.
Do you feel that 16-year-olds are capable of being engaged citizens, and if so, why? Start with this end.
Natasha? Absolutely. I think I've seen through my youth work career that 16, 17-year-olds have got a great understanding of the world, of politics, of things that are happening in their community, a real breadth of understanding around issues, and they have got the confidence and the agency to go and actually implement that. I think a lot of the projects that young people take part in, again, whether it's through the Scouts or through youth clubs, they really strongly believe that they can make a difference, and I think allowing them to vote helps them to understand how they can make that difference.
I agree completely again. I think 16 to 17-year-olds are some of the most engaged people in society. I mean, it's when I would argue that you're at your most politically active. So I think it's a time when you can be experimental. And I think in terms of community impact, we see every day through our own organisations here the difference that young people can make. So they're already doing it, and I think what ought to be recognised is that young people are doing this already without having the opportunity to vote. So we see through things like Scout Community Week and people helping out as young leaders that young people are already engaged, but votes at 16 would kind of further what's already out there.
Yeah, I mean, so that if young people are engaged at the age of 16, you make some of the most difficult decisions in your life. When you're selecting your A-levels, doctors, lawyers, barristers, accountants, at 16 years old, when you make the decision that you want to become a doctor, a barrister, or an accountant, or what the professional career you want to go into, or training or voluntary opportunity. So to say that if we're not engaged at that age, then what age are we engaged? The age that we qualify. It's the decisions that we make at 16 that lead us to the degrees that we get, the jobs that we get. So I think it's very important to understand that young people at the age of 16 are very, very intelligent.
Just to echo pretty much what everyone on the panel has said, I think it's such an arbitrary line. I also think that for someone, a policymaker or an adult, for instance, at what age, what volition do they have to say that you can vote at 18, but at the day before you're 18, that you're not worthy of the vote? I think it does young people a disservice, and it's not necessarily about young people, about adults recognising the level of engagement of young people, because there are so many ways in which young people are engaged and they're part of the conversation. They may not even realise it, but they are. So I definitely think that young people have the volition and have the right from the age of 16 to vote.
Thank you very much. Pass on to Orson now.
Why do you think that young people are less likely to vote than older people? I'll start with Natasha.
I think part of it is they feel that politics is possibly not for them, and I think that we see, especially in the UK, a lot of the politicians are a lot older, and they target their policies towards the older voting contingent. So we know that older people are likely to vote, and a lot of policies and a lot of politics is directed to them. So it doesn't mean that young people don't feel engaged in issues. I think they do, but I think sometimes they feel like they're not being either spoken to, and when they speak back, they're not being listened to.
So I think there's two kind of points to be made here. So you read a lot about disengagement of young people with politics. So I think, as has already been said, young people feel alienated from the political system. But I think the key thing is that we need to recognise that voting's a habit. So if we don't get young people to vote when they first vote, they're less likely to vote in the future. So I think we've got to get young people to vote when they're actually able to do it. And the younger that you start, say it votes at 16, got through with compulsory education now till 18, you'd be able to introduce young people to voting, get them to vote, and realise the importance of voting in a democracy whilst they're still at school, and get them into the habit of voting, which they then continue into later life.
I think it starts from the education of politics first. When I was in high school, citizenship, when we went through that, it was taught by a maths teacher that had no idea of politics. She never voted in her life. So I mean, is that the role model that we want to put towards young people of politics? If we're getting people that are just normal teachers that don't vote, have no aspirations in politics, to teach young people about politics, no, it's not the way we should be doing it. I think we need to change that curriculum on how we educate young people on politics, and then it will build a formation of how young people get involved into politics.
I think it's there's an example of the vicious circle here, whereby young people feel that politics isn't for them because, for instance, the last budget, which is incredibly focused on pensioners and people over 55, because they are the largest voting demographic. So by taking young people out of the equation, I believe that 44% of 18 to 25-year-olds voted in 2010. The government don't need to focus on young people because they're not making their voices heard, because they're not the ones voting. So I think that's the reason why it kind of self-perpetuates. So because you're not listening to my voices, I'm not going to speak up, and then it allows the government to ignore them. So I feel as if young people feel that way, but they need to realise that the only way that they're going to make a difference is if they make their voices heard, and bringing 16 and 17-year-olds into that conversation will be a big part of that, so that we can invest in the future of our young people, because they're the ones who are going to be taking our country forward.
To Alex, you mentioned the importance of people voting. Do you think compulsory voting should be introduced?
So it's important. I think the problem we have is that young people don't necessarily understand the need to vote in a democracy. I think the difficulty you have, so from my personal point of view, I don't think you should be forced to vote. I think I read an article by the chair of the BYC, which came up with the statistic that's already been used here, that only 44% of 18 to 25-year-olds vote. But I think the government's using that as an excuse to kind of go away from the debate that we're having here today. I think it's difficult because we live in a democracy. I think people should be given a choice. There should potentially be something on the ballot paper that says none of the above. I know you can spoil your ballot paper, but I think that would kind of show the disconnection that people feel at the moment. I think it's difficult to force people to vote in a democracy, because I think personally you should have the right as to whether or not you vote. It's freedom of expression and stuff. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'll pass you to Shaquille for the next question.
This question is primarily to our UK youth representatives, Hassan and Wasim. You said in your written evidence that more needs to be done to be politically engaged young people. I'd like to know what more you would like to see done.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, like I emphasised in the other point, was education. I think we need to change the way we educate young people around politics and how they're introduced to it, because I mean, what they learn in the classroom is the first experience of what politics is. So if it's taught properly, then they'll get a good vision of it. If not, then if it's taught badly, then obviously that's how the cycle will go, unless they join an organisation that's going to teach them about politics. The other thing is to get politicians in schools to teach them, because at the end of the day, politicians are ordinary people. They are people with jobs, with university degrees. They've been through the system. So if you're teaching people that this is a politician, this is who they are, this is the education they have been the exact same route that you've gone through. They are just ordinary people. They're not this elite of professionals that sit around in the boardroom and discuss about making policies. They are just ordinary people. But I think the politicians themselves need to do more to come out into schools, maybe take over a school lesson or a PE class, just to really engage with young people about understanding who they are.
Just to follow on from what Wasim said, I think the solution lies in the collaborative approach. It's not just the job of formal schools or for the voluntary sector or for the public sector, statutory youth services. It's a job for parents, it's a job for schools, it's a job for organisations such as ours, which are represented here today. It's a job for policymakers, it's a job for councillors and MPs to work together to ensure that young people are made aware of the decisions which affect their daily lives. I think a lot of young people, and not just young people in general, are so far away from the political process. They only really feel as if they're a part of it when their gas bill goes up or there's a policy around energy or housing. But it's so much more than that. It affects the way in which we interact as citizens every day. So it's a conversation that needs to happen between everyone to ensure that people are made aware of the decisions and the fact that the decision that they make when they cast their vote is one which they will feel will make a better future for them and for the country.
Natasha and Alex, would you agree with that view?
Absolutely. I think, sorry to jump in, Alex. I think we definitely see that it is a joint responsibility and it's society's responsibility to step in and encourage and support young people. I think young people have got infinite amount of potential and capabilities, but at the same time we've noticed that pairing them and creating trusted relationships with adults really can be key to success.
Yeah, I would agree completely with everything that's been said so far. Yeah.
Kind of expanding on Wasim's point, do you think young people feel listened to by politicians, and why do you think they might not? All right. Just to Hassan, you can
as someone who isn't a young person, I find it difficult to answer, but I'll make an attempt. From my general perspective, I don't think people do, but I think that's also true of most of the adult population as well. I would say that there's a general problem with disengagement from the political process amongst the public. It's very all well and good for MPs and for policymakers to sit in their gilded halls such as this, but to have that sort of face-to-face engagement and actually be on the streets listening to the concerns of the electorate and of young people, I don't think that necessarily is the case, and I think that's not necessarily an issue for the public. That's something for MPs to address and to look at how they can ensure that they're best representing their constituents.
Just the young people on the panel, so Alex and Wasim. Do you feel young people have any power to influence government policy?
If they're taught how to implement policies, then yeah, of course, young people would get involved because we're there representing. We have youth councils, youth cabinets, youth parliaments, MYPs, DMYPs, and they're there to represent young people. So if we're taught about how to influence policies, then of course young people would get involved because the policies that affect them, they would want to change. They would want to have their say on it.
Yeah, I agree. There are already mechanisms in place for young people to have their say, such as British Youth Council as well. And I think that organisations that are represented here today give young people a chance to kind of voice their concerns, to stand up for what they believe in. So I think the charity sector is maybe already a step ahead of government in this case. So
again, to the Alex and Wasim, what would you like to see political parties doing to engage more with young people?
So I think they've got to start looking at issues that young people care about. I think there's too much focus, as we've already said, on issues that affect the bulk of the mass of the voters. So we're looking at pensioners, young people and middle-aged people and stuff. So I think the easiest way to do this would be to introduce Voter 16. But if they start to talk about youth issues, then having the discussion would kind of provoke young people to take more action. And I think I'd like to see government as well kind of allow young people to play a greater role. So I know that the Scouts, as a result, with the British Youth Council this year, will be proposing that the British Youth Council supports greater involvement of young people in Parliament, so the introduction of some kind of youth ministry, allowing young people access to these decision makers so that they can then have more of a say and try and change the system to something they'd like to see.
Something I would like to see done is something really basic, but I think would make a big difference to young people themselves. It's just basically a councillor or an MP just to introduce himself to young people, go out there and actually meet the young people, just like they do at their surgeries, or if they're at an event or charity event, MPs and councillors come running, but just come to the school assembly, introduce young people, and then they know who they're talking about when they're saying Member of Parliament, councillor, because I didn't know any of who my councillors or my MPs were before I got involved in politics, but if I didn't get involved in politics, I probably wouldn't have still known who they were. Just, you know, make that first step of getting in touch with young people, because they're there to represent everybody in their constituency, not just people over the age of 55, everybody in the constituency. So Member of Parliaments and councillors should go out to schools, colleges and universities, introduce themselves to young people, show them who they are.
Do the other panels have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think, so our evidence was completely based on the ideas of our Dear London Youth Advisory Board. And I think they had raised a point that while some of them knew their MPs, there is a perception about the sort of backgrounds that politicians come from and sort of the life experiences that they do. And we know that's not true for all MPs, but I think there's a chance to raise aspirations of young people as well by actually doing face-to-face surgeries or spending time with young people and explaining who those people are and why they decided to go into politics and the difference that they want to see in their communities. I think that's a really positive impact that they could have on young people, and we should see more of that.
I'd just like to add that for MPs and councillors and other people, other elected officials, there's a real opportunity for them to look at organisations such as ours and the way in which we've tried to embed young people at the heart of what we do, whether that be through UK Parliament or through advisory boards, or whether it be having trustees on our boards. It shows that as organisations that we have faith in young people, and that they can see the great work that they're doing, and that they're not as scary as they may think they are.
Just to go back slightly to the point about young people having power to influence government policy, open to all members of the panel, would you say that the majority of young people actually use that ability to have influence in government? Natasha?
We've had some fantastic results with our Dear Londoners, going and speaking to policymakers at all levels, from local government right up to the Cabinet Office. I think whenever we've put young people in front of policymakers, they've always been really respected, their views have been listened to, and we've seen some kind of impact that's followed on from that.
Yeah, I agree completely. So when we've put young people alongside MPs at events at party conferences or here in Westminster as well, we've seen that the MPs are willing to listen. The young people do have a lot of views, they do care. I think maybe some people are more engaged than others, but there is a widespread feeling amongst young people that they do have the opportunity, and they do use that at the moment, I think.
Yeah, at UK Youth, there was an opportunity with Model Westminster to influence policy and education. It was a good turnout where young people really wanted to get engaged, and some of it was a new system to them about policy. They didn't know what policy was, how to get engaged with it. So it's about introducing them to policy and how to influence it. Then maybe young people more will get involved.
Just to follow on from what Wasim just mentioned, the Model Westminster event, I believe it was last week, was sort of a youth consultation event which was looking to feed into a current Department of Education policy consultation around the balance of competencies in education training in youth between the EU and the UK, which I think that there should be more of those things. From Wasim and another member of UK Youth Voice who attended, they said it was an incredibly productive and interesting day. Just from UK Youth perspective, from when we try to respond to policy consultations or submit evidence and such as this, we try to include the views of UK Youth Voice at every point. With our party conference activity, we have young people who represent us on our panels who are engaging with policymakers, with MPs at every opportunity, and from their perspective, they feel as if they're being consulted, and they feel great about that, but also when we just talk to MPs, they're really, really glad to see young people making their voices heard. It's just a shame that they can't do it at the ballot box for 16 and 17 year-olds.
Brandon, if you want to.
Hassan, you said about the Model Westminster Balancing of Competencies event at the Department of Education, I believe. Do you think that's a better way of engaging young people within society and within departments in government?
I think so, because it's. I think we can get into the view that things like that can be tokenistic, but I think in this case, because it's a live consultation, something which the Department of Education are looking to get as many views as possible on from organisations, from schools, from youth organisations, from training providers, and from young people, because young people are part of the equation. They really actually want to listen to what young people have to say on these views. So I really do think that it was. Well, I didn't attend, but I was thinking to tell you more about it. But I really do think that from all perspectives, it's an exercise which has merit.
Unfortunately, we're running just a little short on time, so if witnesses could keep the answers brief, that would be appreciated. You could pass on to Joe, if that's okay.
All of this has been sort of touched on already. This is to all the panellists. Whose responsibility should it be to engage young people in politics and current affairs? We'll start with Hassan.
As I mentioned earlier, it's very much a collaborative effort. We can only, I think, for us to achieve a real change, we all need to be on the same page. Schools need to talk to youth organisations need to talk to councils need to talk to councillors and MPs. It has to be a collaborative effort, because if all of things which influence the debate are going in different ways or on different pages, then the result will just inherently be not as good as it could be. So yeah, just to reiterate that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it needs to start off when they're first introduced to politics at school, about the right training, the right education that they've been taught through classes like citizenship or politics. But then at about 16, young people are already studying politics within their colleges and schools, and the only understanding they have of politics is when they get a day off. Obviously, they all enjoy that, but maybe we can get involved at 16 in colleges where all young people are voting in the college, the high school, the university, because everybody's there together, everybody's got a vote if they're registered, and it's on that same day, and they really understand what politics is about. It's about collectively the whole country voting to change the leaders of the country.
As Hassan said, it's got to be a collaborative effort, so I think as a sector, the youth voluntary services sector is quite good at working together to try and champion young people's issues. So I know that with the Scouts, we're currently talking to Michael Gove and Tristram Hunt as well, because I think, as has already been said, there's some fundamental issues in terms of citizenship education, where people have said that they don't feel it offers young people enough information, they're not engaged enough with the democratic process. So I think we have to work together, because there are numerous channels that young people can learn about citizenship, about politics. And I think we've got to look just beyond schools as well. Scouting offers citizenship education to its young people. We try to put forward how important it is to vote. So I think, yeah, it's got to be broader than just government and just the charity sector.
Just to echo the point just made, I think we do rely a lot on citizenship education at school, but really thinking about other places that young people choose to go. A lot of young people don't have great interest or don't feel like school is the avenue for them, but they choose to go to places like youth clubs, they choose to get involved in other organisations outside, and so it's maybe us thinking about how do we engage young people in politics through those channels as well. There's some fantastic organisations out there like Bite the Ballot that really work hard to engage young people in politics, and maybe it's about using more innovative methods as well to really get them hooked at that age to sort of build that lifelong habit of voting.
Okay, and how would you respond to those who say that if young people don't vote, it's their own choice and they shouldn't complain about not being engaged? I'm going to start with Natasha.
It's interesting that nobody would ever say the same about pensioners. There's lots of old people who choose not to vote, and yet the policies that affect them still get through. I think there is a symptom in this country that we tend to talk down to young people. We tend to disenfranchise them, and I think lowering the voting age is something that we can do to show that we actually really care about the voices of young people and we're willing to listen to them.
I think the fact that only 44% of 18 to 25-year-olds vote doesn't necessarily mean that only 44% care about political issues. I think we've got to look broader than that. Young people across the country, from as young as, well, scouting between 6 and 25, are already engaged. They already care about these issues. So yeah, I think we've got to look at wider disengagement and maybe try to address the issues that arise there.
I mean, it's over 1.5 million 16 to 7 years old denied the opportunity to vote. We can't just say don't let them vote because they're not going to turn out, or don't let them vote because it's not going to make a difference, the statistics are going to be bad. We have to give them a chance, because that's what this country, that's what democracy is about, giving people equity and chance to, you know, have their voice heard.
Any person at any age can choose or choose not to vote. Choosing not to vote is a political choice within itself. Why would we necessarily think of young people when we think, oh, if they're not choosing to vote, then they shouldn't be enfranchised in the first place? What about I think something like 30% of over 55s in the last general election who didn't vote? Should we take their vote away as well? I think that's an argument which doesn't have any basis in merit at all. Obviously, the 18 to 25-year-old is the demographic which isn't voting as much as others. So I think we need to look at ways in which we can increase turnout as opposed to just taking away their rights.
Thank you. Louise?
What do you think the role of citizenship education should be in engaging young people in politics?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
What do you think the role of citizenship education should be in engaging young people in politics?
I think it's got an enormous role to play. I think we're really aware that quite a lot of young people first hear about civic participation and voting through citizenship education. The experience of the young people that we work with is that as I think the panel has mentioned several times, those first experiences are quite often not very positive. They are lessons that are rushed, poorly planned and delivered by teachers who citizenship education isn't their first subject. I think getting in more experts, people who've got a real passion and a real interest in that area, would really help to benefit the sort of knowledge of young people and mean that they're more likely to want to get engaged in issues.
Yeah, I think so. Talking from a citizenship point, like outside education, I think we need to educate our young people better on how to vote and why they should vote. I think, again, it comes back to the education point. If young people don't understand why they should vote and aren't made aware of the role that voting plays in democracy, I think it's quite difficult. And I think that currently there aren't enough places where young people can go and ask about citizenship. So I know that through scouting we're encouraging young people to register to vote from the age of 16. So I think more needs to be done there, because you can do that before you're allowed to vote. You can sign up, it's relatively easy, and we can educate young people about why they should vote and why they should exercise their right.
Yes, I mean it is the first protocol to politics for young people. For many young people, it is the first route into politics. So there should be teachers in the area of politics be teaching the lessons, not just whoever the school can get facilitate the class. There should be real teachers having elected representatives at the class and at the lessons as well. To really get the emphasis of politics that here we are, this is what we do, and this is how you guys can get involved. Teach them from the basics. And then they can, if they choose to do it, they can go on to do A-levels or GCSEs. But we need to first get into the head what politics, what democracy is.
I think it's easy to fall into the trap of blaming the formal education sector for not providing enough sort of quality PSHE education. I think there is a general wider issue around the quality of PSHE education within the statutory sector, but that's the thing. Just from the pressures from the DFE around sort of formal education, that it's not their focus. So what needs to be done is that for experts, for people from organisations such as ours, from organisations, political education organisations such as Bite the Ballot and other organisations, they need to be brought into schools. There needs to be that collaboration so that teachers who may not necessarily have much knowledge in the fact, but find themselves teaching it, can say, we're going to bring someone else in who's going to inspire you. We're going to bring someone else in who knows what they're talking about and is going to try to engage you as much as possible. Just from our perspective at UK Youth, we're currently putting together a democracy challenge, which UK Youth Voice have been involved in the consultation of. And that's going to be a resource that could be used in schools to inform young people of their democratic rights and to inform them of how voter registration works, so that they can make those informed decisions when they do find they go to the ballot box.
Thank you. Thiani has the next question.
Thank you, Michael. All of your answers have been so insightful and interesting, so thank you. This is a question for the whole panel. Do you believe that the voting age should be lowered to 16? Why and why not? So should we start with Natasha?
I absolutely believe that the voting age should be lowered to 16, but what's probably more important than that is the young people that I work with all passionately believe that the voting age should be lowered to 16. And I think if you've got young people who are saying that they and their peers would vote, I think that's something that should really be listened to. I think, as we've said before, encouraging young people to build a habit of voting at an early age means they're much more likely to vote as they get older. And I think opening up politics to more people where they're able to contribute, they're able to start getting involved in shaping policies that affect them and their lives can only be good for the country.
As has already been said, I truly believe that 16 and 17-year-olds and young people in general is when you're at your most politically active. So I think we've got to give young people that chance. As we've already said, like, you don't have to go to vote. At the moment, it's just a blanket ban on 16 and 17-year-olds going. So even if you introduce votes to 16, you're not going to force young people to go to vote. But I think they've got to be given the opportunity. So yeah, I would back the campaign completely.
I mean, I also believe that young people at 16 should be able to vote. But because we're denying 1.5 million young people the chance to have their voices heard on issues that affect directly free education. You know, they could join the army, but they can't have a say if they should be there or not. If they're given the right to vote, then it gives them more of a reason to do something like that. You know, to have a chance to really broaden their aspects. But and entirely, it's about education. So I still believe I always emphasize the education about politics. If we're not teaching young people properly what politics is, why should they vote? That's the question: is why should they vote if they're not taught about it properly?
Just to echo everything, from my own personal opinion, I wholeheartedly believe in votes at 16. I think my reasons are as follows. We live in a democracy, and I find it's just madness that we're denying a whole demographic of people quite a basic human right. I genuinely believe that in 20 years' time we'll look back. Do you remember when the voting age used to be 18? Like 30 years beforehand, when the voting age was 21, that sort of level of we'll look back and we'll see that we can't even comprehend that it was ever anything different. I think for young people, and my second point is not necessarily the fact that if votes at 16 was implemented, that every 16 and 17-year-old is going to vote, because that's not the truth. And it's not even about the fact that young people, 16 and 17-year-old, would be voting. It's about the fact that they have the right. It's the fact that they can make that choice. There are so many decisions which are made for young people by adults. It's about time that they were given, especially at 16, which is an age which you're on the cusp of becoming an adult. That you're given that opportunity to make your voice heard.
Thank you. And this is a question specifically for Natasha and London Youth. You said in your written evidence that lowering the voting age would be a beneficial to society as a whole. Could you explain why?
Yes, I think our evidence, as I said, it was drawn up by young people on our Youth Advisory Board. They believe so many of the reasons that we've brought up in the panel today, that by allowing young people and allowing more people to have a say in politics and opening up the political discourse to a wider range of people, it means we're more likely to see policies that will affect people and will have impact on their lives, and they'll be able to comment and get involved in that.
Thank you. I'll move you on to Sadia for the next question.
So starting with Hassan, how would you respond to the argument that 16-year-olds are not mature enough to make a decision as important as who to vote for in an election?
It's quite a difficult one to answer. I mean, the thing is, there are so many. I think there's an inherent within that statement. There's an inherent sort of hypocrisy in how we view what an adult is, because as I mentioned before, obviously with parental permission, you can get married at 16. You can join the armed services at 16. You can learn how to drive at 17. What's the difference between someone who is 16 and who is 17 and who is 18? I think that if just to points that I made earlier about you're making life decisions at 16. So if you choose to, after finishing GCSEs or vocational education, you're starting to think about what you want to do with the rest of your life at that point. I mean, it's a decision which takes a level of maturity to take that decision. So I think that there's such a greying of the area of what actually constitutes an adult. Plus, people mature at different ages. It's so difficult to put an arbitrary stop at one point and say, at this point, you're not mature enough to make that decision, but at this point, you are. It just doesn't work, I don't think.
Yeah, I personally think it's wrong to say that young people at the age of 16 are not mature. From the riots, we saw that it was not just young people involved in rioting, it was, we had people from all ages. So are they not mature as well? Age people in their 30s, 40s, 50s? No, of course not. But young people, at the age of 16, they're making life-changing decisions that affect them. But really and truly, it's not. They can't have a say on it. They can't have a say if they want to join the army. They can't have a say on whether they want to. They can smoke, but they can't buy cigarettes. I mean, to 16-year-olds, that's absolutely ridiculous. But if we give them the chance to have their say, to really make a difference and feel part of citizens that have a voice, I think it would change the way that they see life as well.
I think it says a lot about what society thinks about young people, without giving them the right to vote. We're already telling them that they're kind of restricted in what they can do, and we see young people in all of our organisations, I'm sure, who are already changing the lives of others. So we have young leaders and scouts from the age of 14 who are educating other young people. There are young carers in the UK who are looking after their loved ones all day, every day, all the time. So I think saying that young people aren't mature enough to vote is quite naive, and I think it's doing a disservice to young people who are already very active within their local, national and also regional communities.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on that exact point. I think we see young people creating change in their communities every single day. So the fact that we'll deny them the right to vote and have a say in the political process, I think is disgraceful.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have one final question for all members of the panel. If you were writing a report on votes at 16, which recommendations would you include, starting with Natasha?
I would recommend that political engagement in schools and also in non-formal education settings are looked at. We look at how as a society we can bring in more experts to engage young people and really get them to understand the political landscape and context in the UK. I would also encourage people to look to the kind of organisations that are delivering amazing social impact in communities and already engaging young people in politics with a small p, to look at how we can engage them in sort of taking part in democracy on a larger scale.
Yeah, I basically echo all the points that have been said there. I think it's about recognising that young people are already making a change. We see every day that young people are making life-changing decisions, are helping others across their communities in the UK. And I think we've got to recognise that and really kind of help government realise that young people do understand the decision-making process. They are mature enough to vote already, and really just champion the good work that's already being done by organisations sat here, and recognise that young people, are mature enough already to make those decisions.
I mean, a policy that I would recommend is how politics is first introduced to young people. Secondly, also organisations that we're part of, organisations that you're also part of. Is how to get young people more involved in those organisations. The BYC, UK Youth, London Youth, the Scouts, these are organisations that have empowered young people to do what they're doing today. But without these organisations, ask ourselves, where will we be today? Will we still be involved in politics? Maybe yes, maybe no. So we need to get more young people the chance to join these organisations and teach them about these organisations that are already out there.
The recommendations that I would make to government, a lot of it would echo what's been already said. Increasing not just the quantity but the quality of political education, citizenship education, and trying to already see what's being done. I think it's easy for government to come in and say we're going to initiate this scheme, we're going to initiate that scheme, but there's so much good work that's been done on the ground in youth organisations, in schools, just even informal volunteering. People who volunteer and they don't even realise that they're actually part of something larger than themselves. I think what also needs to happen as well is that the government really need to look at how they engage with young people in itself. So it's okay for there to be a Department of Education and a Cabinet Office and all these government departments, but maybe there needs to be someone who represents young people's views on all of those issues within each department, someone who has a cross-departmental brief across government to really champion young people. And I would recommend that in the next Parliament, VOSA 16 is enacted.
Well, once again, I would like to thank the witnesses for taking the time to not only provide written evidence but also oral evidence, all of which will be used for our final report to government. That's the end of our committee. Thank you very much. Hi there. I would like to welcome you to the second sitting of the British Youth Council's Youth Select Committee regarding votes at 16. Can you please introduce yourselves?
It's John Tonge, Professor of Politics at the University of Liverpool and Chair of the Youth Citizenship Commission under the previous government.
Andy Mycock, Reader in Politics at the University of Huddersfield, member of the Youth Citizenship Commission, and also one of the co-leaders of the Beyond the Youth Citizenship Commission project, which is currently taking place.
Thank you very much. Philip has the first question.
Is it fair to summarise your view as saying it might be right to lower the voting age, but only once young people are better engaged with politics and society?
I suspect that might have a kernel of truth in it, yes. We are not entirely opposed to the principle of lowering the voting age. I'm not quite sure whether the voting age would be to 16 or to 17. They'd take a more moderated approach towards it. But at the moment, we do not believe that the conditions are right for lowering the voting age without a significant change both in the political culture of the United Kingdom, in the way that young people are engaged with in politics and are referenced in policy terms, but also in the way in which young people are allowed to develop knowledge and experience of how politics functions in the United Kingdom and elsewhere, whilst in school and in their communities before the voting age is realised, whatever that voting age is.
You said there that you're talking about sort of the political culture. How will we know when the political culture is right to lower the voting age? How can we measure that?
Well, in some ways, I think that the way in which you can most accurately measure that is by when young people in significant numbers are visibly demonstrating their desire to lower the voting age. And there are a number of organisations, including the UK Youth Parliament, the British Youth Council and various other youth agencies that are extremely keen to advocate the lowering of the voting age. The evidence that that is a more wider held belief across the young people is not there yet. There are no groups of young people campaigning on the streets to lower the voting age, and there's no evidence to suggest that there is a majority of young people that at the moment support that. So I think that that's certainly one significant indication that would suggest that that would be the right point. I think more so that if you looked at documents such as party political manifestos, that if you saw a change in the culture of the way in which political parties design policies and focus them towards young people, that would indicate that there is a change in the way that political parties view young people. And I'd ask you to go back to the 2010 general election manifestos, and I think you'll find that the number of policies designed by young people for young people are able to be counted on all across the three main parties on one hand. So I think that that would be another indication. And I think a further indication would be when we start to see more young people actually represented within the political institutions that we have. And I think at the moment one of the key problems is that it's very difficult for young people to relate to a political class which is still representing age sectors which aren't fully encompassing society.
Do you not think the voting age where it is currently is preventing more younger people getting involved in political institutions, which you're then using as a point to evidence why we
I don't think
vote
so.
on
I think that if that evidence was there, then we would see more 18 to 24-year-olds involved. So I don't see that by lowering it to 16 that that's going to change that significantly. What is clear at the moment is that political parties do not design policies towards the 18 to 24-year-old category, even though they've got the vote. So there is little evidence yet that by lowering the voting age to 16, that would significantly appear to change the minds of political parties themselves.
Just to add to that, the Youth Citizenship Commission undertook an extensive quantitative survey of young people to ask them should the voting age be lowered. They were almost evenly divided on that, and I think, I'll stand corrected on this, that was the biggest survey of young people that's been done on the issue. Every age category above 18 was opposed, which obviously the Electoral Commission found as well in their previous research. Every age category above 18 was opposed to a change in the voting age. So there are issues obviously of democracy. I think the other problem is that 18 to 24-year-olds, only a minority have voted at the last 4 general elections now. Now it may be that 16 and 17-year-olds would be different and a majority would vote, but obviously that would be a leap of faith.
So you think that lowering the voting age should be based on public opinion rather than the opinion that voting may be a right? Do you think that voting is a right?
It's an adult right, and obviously it's a passage of adulthood, a rite of passage as you pass through. So to give someone a vote would be to say you are an adult. Now, obviously that would have wider implications given the different age thresholds that we have. So to give 16 and 17-year-olds the vote would be to give people the vote who we do not deem old enough to buy fireworks, alcohol, gamble, with the exception of the National Lottery, I think, and drive a car unless you're 17, have some child protection measures that cover 16 and 17-year-olds. If you say a 16 and 17-year-old is an adult, then obviously there will be implications, or there ought to be implications, because you're effectively conferring adulthood status on them. And so I think you would have to have a wider review of those age thresholds for all the other things that young people are prohibited from doing. And increasingly the age trajectories of those things have been going upwards. Once upon a time, 16-year-olds could buy cigarettes, they're no longer permitted to. So you would have to have a wider review of that. And there is the question, if they're banned from doing all those things because they're not deemed adult enough, why are they being given such an important thing as the vote?
So you mentioned...
Can I just add to that? Because
very briefly.
There's no evidence that voting at 16 is a human right on an international scale or a national scale, so you can't clearly tie that to any piece of legislation that says that it is a human right at any age. I think more than that there is the problem that the current trajectory of the age of many social rights is actually going upwards. And I think that it seems rather sort of counterintuitive to be wanting to lower the voting age when young people are having their freedom and their rights constrained in other areas. If you look at both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party at the moment, many social rights which are currently afforded to 18-year-olds are likely to be constrained in the future. So it seems as though what adulthood is viewed as in the minds of politicians seems rather confused.
And you both noted the upward trajectory there, which you also noted in your evidence. What do you think the reason for that upward trajectory is?
a good question. I think that people are not. I think people are not being treated as adults until later. That's an approach that has been cross-party.
But why?
To a certain extent, it's social. If you look at the way in which youth and adulthood is being stretched, lots of young people now don't leave home until much later in life. They're getting married much later in life. They're not gaining full-time employment until much later in life. 50% nearly of young people are going to university, so that's stretching it in the other direction. And I think that politicians also see that young people's political voice, and this is something that goes against, to a certain extent, what we are arguing, but I think that they see that it is because older people are voting in more numbers, that it is more politically salient to curtail the social rights of young people. I don't think it's down to one particular issue. That is a far more complex problem about the way in which we're treating the notions of youth and adulthood. If you look at political parties and their age range of youth section membership, you can, if you join UKIP's youth section, if you so wish, you can be a youth up to the age of 30. Now, as someone who's 46, I can barely remember being 30, but it seems to be that generally we seem to be viewing this period of youth is getting more extended into what were traditionally forms of what was seen to be adulthood.
And do you think that people at 16 have the ability to understand political issues?
Absolutely.
You do believe that at 16 people have
and at the age of 14 and at the age of 10.
And do you believe that that is a wide ability, that the general public at large fully understand politics?
That's an interesting point, whether there is a sort of glass ceiling or floor about the way in which adult society views young people's political knowledge and their experience. I think there is an issue there. I think there's also issues between the different generational levels in adulthood as well. So I don't think it's unique to young people, but I do think in some senses that the political experience, knowledge and literacy of young people isn't fully recognised by adults, yes.
So you're saying that 16 and 17-year-olds have a similar level of political knowledge as the current voting?
I don't think I'm saying that, no, at all. I'm saying that there's no evidence to be able for us to test that unless we go out and actually check that. But I think that there is a sense in which some adults do view young people as being politically less mature, yes.
I mean, the largest single category of reason why young people, 16 and 17-year-olds, said that they didn't want to vote, those who were opposed themselves, 16 and 17-year-olds, to lowering the voting age, was they felt they didn't have sufficient knowledge. Whereas if you look at what the Electoral Commission does when they survey why people haven't voted at the last election, lack of knowledge doesn't really feature amongst the reasons amongst the adult population, although I'm sure it is a reason. It tends to be such things as too busy on the day, etc., etc. So we certainly would argue, although we don't think for one moment the world would cave in if 16 and 17-year-olds were given the vote. It didn't cave in when it was reduced from 21 to 18. But lack of political literacy and knowledge is a more significant issue among 16 and 17-year-olds than it would be on average amongst the adult population. That's what we're arguing, choosing our words carefully.
Thank you.
Brandon has a quick additional question. I just asked if you can be brief in your answers.
It was noted by Jonathan in an answer earlier, and it's been noted in quite a lot of the evidence that the lowest rate of voting comes from the 18 to 24-year-old age range. Do you think by them not voting, they're voting with their feet and saying that the political system doesn't fit them and it needs to change?
I think there are a multitude of reasons. I think one of the most significant reasons is the fact that political parties do not design policies for that age group, so they feel in many ways disengaged from the process. The politics itself isn't representative of that age group, and also that there is a sense in which people of that age group aren't finding, in many ways, that their voice is heard. And I don't think that the ballot box alone is a way to enhance that. The problem is, in many ways, is if we look internationally at evidence in Brazil, there's a classic, is a very good case study, where the voting age was lowered. There was a surge in turnout in the first couple of elections. That has since dropped, and the reason has been quite fundamental, is the fact that the political culture hasn't changed, and that parties aren't designing policies for young people, and so they're actually disengaging from a much earlier age. So from the age of 16, they're now disengaging. So that is really what loads our view on it, that there needs to be a change of that political culture before the voting age is lowered. to a certain extent, there are eggs and chickens in this room.
Voters. Why do you think this is?
Sorry, can you say that again? Your voice?
You say it is not explained why political parties and politicians have typically overlooked and not sought to engage with the large group of 18 to 24-year-old voters. Why do you think this is?
Again, I think there's a multitude of reasons. If you want to start, John. I think one of the main problems is that young people between the ages of 18 and 24-year-old within political parties are seen to be different in some ways, that they are segregated in youth sections. They're not involved in the formal, full process of policy making. And in that sense, the political parties see them as somehow separate. Within most of the mainstream political parties, there isn't a separate section for the over 65s. Why have a youth section in the political party? Why not have a mature section in a political party? I think also that the predominant political culture tends to satisfy the interests of those who are involved, and they tend to be older people themselves. So the problem is that older people tend to design policies that tend to suit their own interests or their interpretation of what young people's needs and aspirations are. And I think there is a disjuncture there. So I think that the way in which young people are visualised within policy frameworks is unrepresentative entirely of young people's own needs and desires. I think also it is the fact that we do seem to have an aversion to choosing young people to stand for election. So there does seem to be some point at which young people aren't seen to be as able or in many ways as necessary in filling positions. And I think at all levels, at local council level, at national level, and also at the Westminster level, there needs to be a change in the way in which political parties choose their candidates for election.
Wouldn't lowering the voting age to 16 bolster the group and make government act upon the issues that affect young people more?
Potentially, yes. I mean, obviously votes are power, and I can understand the view of a 16 and 17-year-old who feels disempowered by the fact that they're not voting. But there is an issue of a lack of political literacy and political knowledge, which is particularly acute in respect of local government. And when we were on the Youth Citizenship Commission, we made a lot of recommendations as to how to improve contact between young people and local councils, for example, about which lack of knowledge is very low indeed. So I think it comes back to this chicken and egg argument. Which do you correct first? We're not against the lowering of the voting age in perpetuity, but there are issues of political literacy. There are issues of the fact that young people themselves are far from certain that they want the vote. Yes, in this room, a lot of young people would want the vote, but amongst the wider 16 and 17-year-old population. And there is the issue that the broader democratic issue, does it matter that one of the few parts of British politics is often a dirty word, one of the few aspects of the British Constitution, insofar as we have a constitution that people know about and like, is the current voting age. Does it matter to overturn the democratic wishes of people to keep it at that age? Because according to the Electoral Commission, 78% of the population like the voting age where it currently is. So do you simply sweep that away? We do argue in this booklet beyond the Youth Citizenship Commission that a referendum should be held on the issue, which would be a democratic proposal forward. But in answer to your question, I think what we've got to do first is improve political literacy among 16 and 17-year-olds, and that's why we very strongly advocate a bolstering of citizenship education, which I'm sure we're going to come on to.
You also said parties don't always fulfil promises on youth-centric policies. Could you possibly provide a few examples?
Tuition fees.
Yeah.
I don't really need to say much more than that, do I? And I think in that way, what we're arguing for here is that there needs to be a consideration of the way in which young people are brought through and inculcated in a political culture. Now, I think that's a wholesale revision. The problem that is if voting ages are just simply lowered, and for many political parties, it does appear to be a panacea to all ills in itself. They're not looking at a wholesale revision of the way young people are treated in politics. The gaps in the way in which young people are given that experience of politics during their younger years, in formative years, will not be addressed. And so the fact that we haven't got a universal framework of youth councils across the United Kingdom, the fact that many school councils haven't got enough power to actually genuinely change policy in schools, the fact that the political education is often avoided by teachers who feel uncertain that the quality of citizenship education across schools, the National Foundation for Educational Research and various governmental reports have highlighted that this is a subject that needs to be maintained and to be developed. It is not universally providing young people with that kind of political experience and literacy. And I think that these are issues which politicians need to address before the voting age is lowered, because the universal experience that all young people are gaining, these knowledge, the literacy and the experience of acting as functioning citizens, is not there yet.
Thea Smith has the next question.
You said that lowering the voting age would address the symptoms but not the causes of political disengagement. What are the causes of political disengagement?
There's numerous causes. One is perhaps unrealistic expectations of politicians, which are held whether you be an adult or a young person. We expect them to deliver utopia, and it's simply unrealistic. Secondly, there are issues in terms of the quality of our politicians, which are obvious. Sleaze would be the most obvious that you've had. You've had the expenses scandal. You've had a whole series of things which have battered the reputation of politicians to a point where there's only, I think, red-top journalists who are held in lower esteem. So there are issues over the quality of the supply of politicians. There are also issues of unrealistic expectations that we have of our politicians. You factor them in together, and therefore, that's, I think, it's a combination of those two things.
I think there are issues of trust, there are issues of transparency, there are issues of connectivity with the electorate at large, and with those who aren't voting. I think that one of the problems with the way in which politics in this country is run is that regardless of whether the voting age is 18, 17 or 16, those under that age are almost invisible on the political radar and do not have effective voices to be able to engage with politicians. Now, one of the things that John and I have argued for is that that politicians at both local and national level should hold electoral constituency surgeries in schools so young people can elicit and voice their concerns over things. I think there is a genuine need to reconnect with all voters and non-voters, and I think that all these issues around trust and transparency and representativeness are very much the causes of disengagement. The symptoms of those are in many ways that people look at voter turnout and they say that voter turnout is the critical problem. The causes of those disengagement are much more complex than simply people not voting.
And would you say that there are any groups of young people that are particularly disengaged?
Yeah, there's a clear class effect, and that's why citizenship education is so important, because we've tested this without boring with the details of multivariate models. What we found is that irrespective of your social class, gender, whatever, good citizenship education helps deliver people into polling stations when they get to 18. You're more likely to vote if you've been a recipient of good citizenship education, and so that's why it matters. But yeah, I mean, obviously there is a class effect that working class people from ethnic minorities are less likely to vote. Only a minority of 18 to 24-year-olds voted at the last 4 general elections, and non-voting is particularly high amongst ethnic minorities and amongst working class people. I think we've got to start at first base in addressing that. I mean, obviously, this is not addressing the core reasons, but registration of voters is a key issue. We welcome the fact that government is belatedly beginning to use schools and colleges to address this problem. We argue for compulsory registration of 16 and 17-year-olds ready to vote. Get them registered when they're in schools and colleges. It should be compulsory. There should be no optional going onto the electoral register. If you don't go on the electoral register, it can damage you in later life in terms of getting a mortgage, for example. It should be compulsory in the same way that filling in a census form is compulsory for a householder. So everyone as a youth should be put on the electoral register ready to vote. What we found on the Youth Citizenship Commission, 28% of 18 to 24-year-olds are not even registered, so they can't vote. Now, that's not addressing the core causes of people not voting, but it is an important issue, the issue of registration. So I think we need to start at first base before we start talking about the voting age to some extent.
Can I just add to that? Gender is the other issue which needs to be addressed, and I think that one of the most telling statistics is that 18 to 24-year-olds are the least likely to vote. Female 18 to 24-year-olds are the least likely to vote in that group. And we've called on the all-party Women's Parliamentary Group to actually hold an inquiry into how more young women can be brought into politics, how they can gain that voice and how they can actually be seen. We need more role models in Parliament. We need more women MPs. We need more younger women MPs to change the political culture so we are more gender sensitive and more gender representative.
Just on the point that Dr. Andrew Mycock made, you said that there's genuine need for people to re-engage with politics. Would you say that there was a time when people were engaged in politics, and if so, what happened? Why people disengage now?
It's a great question. The golden age of democracy, where was it? You know, we can go back to the 1950s and look at, you know, huge party political memberships, you know, turnouts over 70% in almost every election, you know, local elections, which to what extent that was a golden age, I'm not quite sure, because many people joined political parties but were deeply passive in their membership. They weren't active, they weren't actually going out engaging in those political parties. And often people who took part in elections voted rather on class lines or on group lines or on family lines. And so, you know, the extent to which they were genuinely engaged in political debate and in actually seeking to change the way politics is developed, I'm not quite so sure. Re-engaging, though, is the process of actually making sure that, in some senses, that there is a political culture that people feel they're part of. And I suspect that that golden age, if it did have some credit, it was the fact that, you know, the fact that people did vote was in some ways an expression of their legitimating of the political process. The extent to which in the 21st century that would be the kind of modern active citizenship that we would seek today, I'm not quite so convinced. So in some senses, re-engagement is actually not re-engagement, it is actually just actually beginning that engagement for a new kind of politics.
Can I just add to that? Yeah, I don't think it was a golden age of politics. Yes, you had electoral turnouts in the 80% in the 50s at one point, but it was a tribal model of politics. People voted on social class lines. If you're middle class, you voted Conservative, working class Labour. I don't think that's healthy. I think voters are more rational now, and they don't have a tribal loyalty to a political party. That partly explains the decline in turnout, but I actually think it's a healthier model, that you've got more of an electoral marketplace and voters are more discerning these days. So, you know, I don't necessarily automatically, you know, think that big turnouts are a sign of a healthy polity, but I do think what we need to inculcate is that it is a duty to vote. And amongst the over 65s, if you look at the recent evidence, about 84%, most recent evidence I saw, 84% of those over 65 believed it was a civic duty to vote, whereas slightly less than half of 18 to 24-year-olds believed it was a civic duty to vote. That's what I think we need to inculcate, the notion via citizenship classes. It's actually a civic duty. When people were asked what constitutes good citizenship in a survey, people said adherence to the law or volunteering in your community. Both great things. Wouldn't want to stop anyone doing either of those things. What they didn't make was the connection with voting. They didn't say voting. It didn't figure in the top 10 of good acts of citizenship, and it's that we need to change.
Thank you for answering that. The next question is from Sadia.
You both briefly mentioned some international examples of lowering the voting age in your written evidence. What do you think we can learn from them?
Very good question. I would say that we need to learn that the discussion about lowering the voting age is one that needs development. I think at the moment the problem has been is the terms of that debate and the depth of quality of the debate has been limited, and often it's reduced to proponents of it saying tax, marriage, army, the opponents of it saying tax, marriage, army. And in some ways we need to develop a richer debate, and rather, I don't want to laud ourselves too much, but you know, we have deliberately on the democratic audit site encouraged voices from both sides of the argument to put forward proposals and in many ways to enrich that debate about it. What we can learn from international examples is mixed. If you talk to someone from Austria, they might say actually that there's been positive elements about the voting
age. So what's your opinion on the current situation in Austria?
Well, in some sense, you could say that it has engaged young people. The young people are seeming to be more engaged. You could take a more negative view and say that actually there's evidence that there's a sizable minority that have voted for the far right, and those tended to vote on the more extremes because they feel that somehow their voice isn't being heard. If we look at Norway, the evidence there is that issues around political literacy haven't been enhanced by voting. That change of political culture hasn't developed. If we look at the Isle of Man, for those, only a third of people vote, registered to vote, and only half of those actually voted. So I would say, at best, the picture is deeply mixed. And in a way, our call for a referendum is to actually undertake a far more earnest debate that encourages us to consider this evidence in more depth and to come to a more considered debate. That doesn't negate the idea that the voting age could be lowered. But I think that a referendum would encourage the political parties particularly to move from simply seeing votes at 16 as a panacea to all ills to actually considering these wider questions of youth culture and political culture and the role of young people, and the fact that they don't engage young people in policy terms in a way which is suitable for the 21st century.
Thank you. Joe has the next question.
Would you support a cross-curricular approach to teaching politics, for example, through history or English lessons, or do you think that dedicated politics lessons are necessary?
I think it's a big curriculum omission. If you're not going to have politics as a central part of citizenship classes, which it should be, where is the politics GCSE? And this is something that has always struck me, that I don't understand why there's not a GCSE politics, so that people will actually learn about the political system. Then at least you could make a more secure case for, say, votes at 17, because at least people at 16 will start learning about our political system. Instead, you'd expect those advocating votes at 16, expect people to go and cast a vote without any political teaching within schools at all. As Andy's pointed out, teachers tend to be shy of the politics component within citizenship classes, and it's too limited anyway. But the original architects of citizenship education wanted it to have people like David Blunkett and Bernard Crick wanted it to have there to be a political component. I'm not convinced that history will necessarily do the job. History classes may be very useful in imparting some historical knowledge, but I'm not sure that they'll deal necessarily with our political system. The history, certainly, it's a long time since I was taught history at school, but it certainly did deal with the political system.
I think that going beyond that, I do agree with John on the idea of a politics GCSE. I think its time is right. I also think that schools need to be compelled to make sure that all young people are given a chance to experience politics, not only through school councils, class councils, connecting with local youth councils, etc., but also that they're campaigning in the local communities. We've run a recent campaign for the University of Huddersfield, a programme called My Country, My Vote, which has connected young people in local schools with university students studying politics with the local youth council. And they've engaged in various campaigns in the local community. And that was aimed at 14-year-olds. And you can see that sense in which 14 and 15-year-olds, regardless of the voting age, start to build that sense of political confidence, that they're engaging the knowledge and the literacy with the experience and the action of politics. And it needs to be explicitly political. I also think that actually there needs to be an acknowledgement that, under the age of 16 or 18, that politics is tribal. There is a problem that many of the representative programmes tend to avoid the fact that we all have different views on politics, and I think that should actually be encouraged. It seems rather odd that we don't give that sense of tribalism of politics, that we have affiliation in different ways up to the age of 16 or 18, and then suddenly you're supposed to go and make that decision. So we've got to be more prepared to actually accept the contentious and contended nature of politics.
Can I just add as well that there is the demand out there. Young people want to know about politics. We make the point on page 1 of the Youth Citizenship Commission report, young people are not apathetic about politics, they want to learn about politics. If you look at what's the 5th fastest growing A-level discipline in the country, A-level politics. The study of politics at university has soared. I mean, there's a lot of young people out there who want to learn about politics, and yet you've got this baffling omission that people are frightened of somehow teaching it at schools until students are 17/18, which to me is nonsense, and that needs addressing as soon as possible.
And do you think that if a politics GCSE was introduced, should it be compulsory?
That's a good question. Andy.
If I'm going to stand out on a limb, I would say that it'd be difficult to compel schools to teach politics at GCSE unless universities were starting to recognise that it had a value for future on. I think that's part of the broader problem. But I do think that the option within a compulsory citizenship education framework that politics GCSE is available, and rather than say general studies or another GCSE, I think that's got to be brought in. We've got to change our culture and accept that, promote the idea that politics as a discipline as well as an action, as a way in which we view life, is a legitimate form of study in schools.
Thank you.
Louise has the next question.
You suggested in your written evidence that the effectiveness of citizenship education in promotional democratic participation and civil engagement has surely been proven. Can you tell us about the evidence?
Yeah, the evidence, we used the survey work with young people for the Youth Citizenship Commission to look at the and test those who had been in receipt of citizenship education for longest, and basically what we did was controlling for social class, gender and other demographic variables to see who had benefited from citizenship education. And it's quite clear that across the board, those who had been in receipt of citizenship education for the longest and those that rated it highest were more likely to vote, more likely to vote, and secondly, more likely to volunteer within their community. So in other words, you've got civil and civic engagement. Civil engagement, people more likely to volunteer as a consequence of citizenship education, more likely to volunteer in the community, and more likely to vote. And to some extent, I think we've won the argument, because Michael Gove didn't like citizenship education, let's face it, and wanted to get rid of it. It has now at least been retained as a subject within the education curriculum, perhaps not with the prominence that we would like, and not delivered still in the way we would like. But we did exhaustive tests, and not just us, there's another person, Professor Paul Whiteley at the University of Essex. He used a different survey to come up with very, very similar conclusions to our own. This was road tested over 2 years of studying citizenship education. You've also had the long-term studies that have been undertaken by David Kerr, which have come to the same conclusion as well. Citizenship education works. And I say that as someone who was at best agnostic when I started looking at this. I was probably of that same mindset. This could be a Mickey Mouse or Cinderella subject. But when you look objectively at the evidence, it's quite clear across now 3 different studies done independently that citizenship education works in making people more likely to vote. Okay? So I'm glad it's been retained, but we need to do more with it, and you need to bolster the political component of it.
I think that's our worry at the moment. Is the last curriculum orders has refocused citizenship towards more economic matters rather than political matters. I think that's an issue of great concern for us. Politics is at the heart of good citizenship and citizenship education. I think also the Department for Education need to encourage more citizenship teachers in schools, and they seem to have taken their foot off the gas, so to speak. And what we're getting is, this is informal feedback from schools, is that it's losing its resonance in schools, and it's a critical period. It needs to actually be enhanced.
Has something to add to that.
Earlier on you mentioned the lack of contention shown when teachers are actually talking about politics. Do you not worry that if a teacher does start going into party politics, or someone in a role of responsibility and someone that a child views as an authority on something, going into party politics might bias young people with their own views? Please can you keep it brief, due to time?
Very much so. It's about skills rather than knowledge. I think there's always the potential for indoctrination, and that's always been the concern about citizenship education, that it will be a form of political education. If you teach political participation and literacy as a set of skills, so that young people are given the tools to be able to interpret the different perspectives, then a teacher having a particular perspective, as long as that teacher situates themselves in a critical manner and says, my view isn't the refined view that you should all adopt, then no, I don't think it's a problem. And I think in many ways it provides a great exemplar of actually how young people can understand the critical nature of politics.
Thank you. Fiona has the next question.
Something that has definitely been mentioned, and you talk a lot about political education. In the youth Commission report that you've got with you, you recommended practical measures like student representatives on school governing bodies and youth volunteering. Do you think that these experiences are more or less valuable than the classroom teaching about politics and PSD and citizenship?
I would say they're complementary. In terms of youth volunteering, that's civil engagement, and you can have schemes of youth volunteering that are bereft of a political component. So national citizen service, whatever the pros and cons of national citizen service, wouldn't necessarily lead to greater political engagement because it's simply about helping out in your community on a useful project. I think what you need is an approach that stresses the value of political activity as good citizenship. That's where the connection has not been made. That's the message we've got to get across, that being politically active is as useful an act of citizenship as going out and digging up or laying a flower bed in an old person's back garden. That's what the message we've got to get across. Political activism.
I think it's the idea that you have to link theory to practice. So what's taught in the classroom is deeply valuable, but on its own it doesn't encourage that sense of political activism and that sense of wider citizenship. So you have to actually understand and experience that contended and contentious nature of politics, and also the fact that good citizenship in your community, volunteering, etc., is in its way connected to politics. The fact is we are realising our rights and responsibilities are political and politicised. So I think there is that more holistic approach. At the moment, I think the problem is that it's a little bit too fractured. It doesn't quite connect. And I think the current government, if I have a criticism of them, is they seem to see volunteering as something which is an apolitical act. It isn't.
The next question is from Brandon.
Two of your objectives brought the Youth Citizenship Commission to define what citizenship means to young people and to increase young people's participation in politics and promote active citizenship, reflecting the communication preferences of young people. Do you think you've achieved those objectives, and how did you do so?
I think that we've partially achieved those objectives at best. We were rather unfortunate in our timing in the fact that we were reported in 2009, and in 2010 the government responded. That government then was forced out of power, lost the election in May 2010. The subsequent government at no point has ever formally contacted the Youth Citizenship Commission, which we find remarkable considering the amount of money invested by the state in an independent inquiry. At the same time, they have been very keen to cherry pick our ideas, and it's been rather rewarding to see that some of those ideas are resonant in policy. Whether we've achieved our wider objectives in changing that political culture and enhancing youth voice, and also in policy terms in changing the way that citizenship is taught in schools, and that developing that wider political culture, I think it's very much work in progress. And so it should be, by the way, because citizenship is developmental. It always will be. We were only part of a step, and the work that you're doing today is another significant part of that step. So I think that it is always going to be progressive in that sense.
Thank you. Jack has the next question.
Which of your recommendations from the Youth Citizenship Commission report do you think would best prepare young people to vote?
In a practical sense, the registration one, which we're so glad, that was such a core recommendation. Our recommendation one in that respect was they've got to be registered, so you need to look at registration. But that obviously doesn't address the wider issue of political participation. Our proposal on school councils is something that I think is key, because that gets young people involved at a very early age, participating in the institution in which they're spending the biggest bulk of their life at that stage. So I'd highlight two: the registration issue in terms of getting ready, but in terms of actual, beyond the nuts and bolts, I'd say participation in school councils school councils placed on a statutory basis to encourage young people to take ownership to some extent of the institution where they're learning.
Shaquille has another point to make.
I'll try and keep it brief. Professor, you suggested earlier that giving 16-year-olds the vote would pose logical problems, as given the vote, 16-year-olds could be viewed as adults, which calls into question whether they should be given all the rights of adults, such as examples used with buy cigarettes, alcohol. But what do you think to the view, and I know you covered this, Dr. Mycock, but I was wondering what the Professor thinks. What do you think to the view that those lines have already been blurred by the ability to commit to marriage, join the army, etc.?
The lines are blurred. On those two specific examples you've just used, first of all, if you join the army, you can't see frontline service. And secondly, in terms of marriage, you need permission from your parents, which suggests you're not really an adult at 16, 17, unless you're in Scotland. Okay. The overall route, the overall trajectory has been upwards, though. The government has tended to raise it. So 16 and 17-year-olds in Scotland who are pro-independence can vote in September, but they won't be able to go out and buy a firework to celebrate their country's independence should Scotland go and vote in favour of independence. Cigarettes, again, a raising of the age. Gambling, you can't. Would you want to be tried in front of 16 and 17-year-old jurors? This country, the state says you can't sit on a jury if you're 16 or 17. And I don't sense a great groundswell out there of people saying, actually, at 16 you're ready to go and try a person who's in the dock. Okay? So we did recommend in the Youth Citizenship Commission report a holistic review of age thresholds, because we I accept the premise in your question. It is a problem. You've got this patchwork quilt. Some aspects you're treated as adults at 16, others 17. So we would recommend a broader review of age thresholds, okay, including the voting age within that review. But at the moment, it's unsatisfactory because in some respects you are still treated very much as a non-adult at 16 and 17, and lowering the voting age in many ways bucks the trend in terms of the direction of travel.
I think this debate about vote 16 is an integral part of it is that there is a debate about what adulthood is. As 21st century citizens, your experience of youth is deeply different to mine. And I don't think that in the current debate about vote at 16 that political parties are considering the contradictory messages that they're sending out. And I think that the work that you're doing in this inquiry is laudable in actually raising that question and getting to think in a more holistic way about what is youth, what is adulthood, and where does the voting age fit in with this. So I think it'll be interesting to hear the response.
And of course, I don't want to labour this, but of course some 16-year-olds are ready to vote. They've got more political literacy than a 40-year-old will ever have. But the intellectual logic of that argument is that you simply allow people to vote whenever they're ready. A Liberal Democrat MP, who I interviewed for the Youth Citizenship Commission, argued that. He said, let them vote as soon as they can. But frankly, I didn't fancy turning around to Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister, and saying, actually, we've come back, here's the recommendation, vote when you're ready. Okay? But that is it's an intellectually logical argument, but there are practical issues. There has to be a cut-off point somewhere in terms of the voting age. Okay?
Finally, I would like to ask, if you were writing a report on votes at 16 to the government, which recommendations would you include?
Sorry, can you say, if we were writing...
if you were writing a report, which recommendations on votes at 16 would you make to the government?
I would recommend quite simply that there is a need for a referendum on this issue, and that this referendum should involve the voice of young people, and young people should lead that debate about lowering the voting age.
Any more points to add?
Well, in a referendum, I'm pretty sure that people would say no, but there'll be a good test of that because Ireland, across the water, is having a referendum on the voting age at 16. So you've got an interesting litmus test coming up fairly soon on that, whether people will have their say as to whether the voting age should be lowered or not. So I think we can watch developments with interest. In terms of just going back to that point though, the holistic review, I'd also include the voting age within a holistic review of age thresholds. To what extent should people have a certain set of rights, and what is the age of adulthood? If you're lowering the voting age to 16, as far as I'm concerned, you're making people adults, and therefore you're going to have to lift all the child protection that pertains to 16 and 17-year-olds, because voting should be for adults. So there are quite serious implications of lowering the voting age, which really ought to be considered by people.
I think our main concern is two-tier citizenship, that some citizens will simply have less rights than others, and that's the dangerous situation to create. And at the moment, that appears to be the way in which political parties are approaching votes at 16.
Well, thank you once again for attending this evidence session. That's the end.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Extremely interesting. Thank you.
Can you have this next set of witnesses, please? Hello and welcome to the third sitting of the British Youth Council's Youth Select Committee conducting an inquiry into votes at 16. I would like to remind everyone that you can engage with the debate on Twitter using the hashtag YouthSelect. Please can the panellists introduce themselves, starting with David.
Hello, I'm David Kingman. I'm a researcher at the Intergenerational Foundation, which is a think tank which researches problems affecting younger and future generations in the UK.
Hello, my name is Isabella Sanke. I'm the Policy Director at Liberty, the National Council for Civil Liberties. We are a domestic human rights campaigning organisation based in London.
Good afternoon, my name is Darren Hughes. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive of the Electoral Reform Society, Britain's oldest democracy organisation, and we are a voters' rights group campaigning for a better democracy.
Thank you. I would like to firstly go to Louise for the first question.
In his evidence said that the fact voting is a human right means the burden of proof should be on those seeking not to lower the voting age. Do the other witnesses agree?
I'm very happy to go first. Yes, we absolutely agree. We are a human rights campaigning organisation, so we have quite a lot of experience and expertise in human rights matters. As you've said, the right to vote is a fundamental human right. It's enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights, which is given effect by the Human Rights Act. The right is not absolute, so it can be limited for objectively justifiable reasons. And the reason of ensuring that those voting in a population understand the implications of their actions is definitely an objectively justifiable reason. The issue is where you decide to draw the line. And the European Court on Human Rights has been very clear that an inclusive approach should be taken when you're dealing with excluding categories of people from voting. So we think that when it comes to the voting rights of younger people, rather than excluding more, you should be excluding less.
We would probably argue that it's not that a breach of human rights is taking place right now because 16-year-olds are not included in the vote, but we would think that it's a sensible extension of human rights to expand the franchise to include all people who are 16 and 17. So it would be an expansion of human rights rather than arguing that at the moment it's a breach.
Also, voting is a fundamental right. Defend drawing the line at 16.
So, sorry, could you repeat the question?
Voting is a fundamental right. Defend drawing the line at 16.
Well, as I think I said initially, that it is a fundamental human right, but it's not absolute. And there are many restrictions that can be imposed for good reason and are across the world. One of those restrictions is age. And as I said, I think the justification for that is to ensure that those who are exercising a right to vote understand the implications and understand what they're doing. I think age is always going to be an age restriction will always be a blunt tool, but you need to have a proxy for maturity. I think your earlier witnesses were just talking about the impossible situation that would be created if it was done on an individual basis with some sort of test, I imagine, for whether somebody has got the intellectual competence to vote. So that's not something that we would advocate. It would be a nightmare to institute in practice. So age is always going to be a blunt tool, but it seems very clear from all sorts of scientific evidence and from the evidence we see at Liberty every day of how keen young people are to engage in the political system and to advance human rights campaigns, that 16-year-olds are more than capable to exercise that right.
So, assuming that for a moment that you agreed arguments against lowering the voting age linked to maturity, education and turnout were correct, would the argument that voting is a human right still trump this? So would the arguments against lowering the voting age linked to maturity and education, if that was correct, would the argument that voting is a human right, would that still kind of trump that and overcome that?
May I? The point which I was making, I mean, obviously it's very difficult to say. The point I was making in the piece of evidence, which has just been quoted, is simply that, as has been said already, there's nothing wrong with having reasonable restrictions on the application of the human right. But the point I make in this evidence is simply that our idea of what constitutes a reasonable restriction has shifted very considerably over time in Britain. Lest we forget that women used not to have the vote. There used to be property qualifications. The voting age was only lowered to 18 in 1969. So when deciding what constitutes a reasonable restriction on the human right of voting, that idea, that the line is not fixed. It has moved historically, and so there are no universal reasonable reasons for restricting the franchise.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. The thing to understand about the human rights framework is you have some absolute rights and some limited rights. So the right to be free from torture is an absolute right. You can never justify torture against anybody, but the right to vote is a limited right, I think, as we've all referred to, and it can be limited only to the extent that that limitation can be shown to be reasonable, legitimate and justified. And as my colleague has just said, over time, our notions of what is reasonable and objectively justified have changed. We have a very proud history, I think, in this country of progressively realising the right to vote for everybody within our community. And we very much feel the time has come now to extend the franchise to those who are 16 and 17 years old to reflect the responsible, mature and engaged citizens that we think that age group now is.
So just to pick up on a point you said, why do you think now is the time to reduce it to 16 and 17-year-olds? What's changed?
Well, arguably, we could have done so a lot earlier. And as I say, I think this question is one of gradual political realisation. We wouldn't like to put a mark in the sand and say at any point 16-year-olds should or shouldn't have had the vote. It's arguable that this change is overdue for all sorts of reasons. So I don't think it's necessarily a matter of timing. I think, as has already been recognised, I think in your evidence session this morning, the lack of general voter engagement, but particularly the trend amongst young people, is an argument for saying that it should definitely happen now. But as I say, I don't think it's a question of 16-year-olds should never have had the vote. Perhaps they should have much, much sooner.
I think there's always been a group of interested people who have been pushing this idea for some time. I guess what has changed is that more people are now looking at it and agreeing and are being persuaded by the evidence of it, and I'm sure members of the committee will be aware of, through your own reading, of people who openly say, I used to think it would not be a sensible idea, but I've read the material, I've seen the arguments, now I'm persuaded. I think the other thing is that there is a live discussion in the United Kingdom about how to revive politics and how to make people feel a greater sense of of trust in the system and ownership of the way things are done, and that naturally leads itself to saying who is part of democracy, who is being chosen to represent the public, and how effective can that be done, how can we get more people to register to vote and to vote, and as part of that, votes at 16 has emerged, thankfully, as one of the key arguments in this regard. I think the second thing that's brought it absolutely to the forefront is what is happening in autumn in Scotland, where 16 and 17-year-olds have won a legislated right to vote, and that creates an incredible anomaly from the 20th of September on, when those same people lose the right to participate in democracy. And I think that forces everybody who has an interest in this to confront the notion that it is time to make sure that all public elections are conducted with the rights of 16 and 17-year-olds to vote with other citizens.
Thank you. Philip has our next question.
You've all said in your written evidence that you support lowering the voting age to 16. Conscious of time, can you briefly summarise your main reasons for believing that? If we start with Darren.
Sure. I think you've heard so many of the arguments. I guess from our point of view, the generation of people who are 16 and 17 are among the first who have had some form of comprehensive but nowhere near as good as that could be civic education, and so I think it's easy to make the case that it's more likely to be a much more politically engaged generation than say people who were 16 20 years ago, and so with all the various arguments that are running in support of votes at 16, it just seems to us timely that with the coming of age of these younger citizens who have received civic education, and with the other factors, as I mentioned, Scotland just before, the time is now right for this. And critically, it's beginning to win mainstream political opinion amongst some of the parties. So it really is a march on the way to the proper place, and that's one of the many reasons why the Electoral Reform Society has been a long supporter of votes at 16.
And Isabella.
Thank you, yes. Well, Liberty believes it's a fundamental human right and that an inclusive approach should be taken. We think the key to a healthy, functioning democracy that respects human rights and is premised on the rule of law is to have as much representation as possible within agreed limitations. We think that although it doesn't seem perhaps as obvious as previous forms of discrimination against people on the basis of their gender not being able to vote, or in other parts of the world on the basis of race, having a non-inclusive approach, as we do at present, actually does discriminate against young people. We're not arguing for votes for everyone, no matter what age, but I think everybody would agree that the decisions taken today in Parliament and by our elected representatives have a knock-on effect, and perhaps a larger effect for the younger generations than for the elder generations. So we think it's an issue of intergenerational justice, and that by discriminating against young people, necessarily politicians are then going to be looking to implement policies that perhaps benefit the older generations rather than the younger ones, given how many decisions are taken every day that will affect young people, whether immediately because it relates to tuition fees or apprenticeship investment, or whether in the longer term decisions about national debt and climate change. Having younger representation can only benefit the attention paid to younger people when those decisions are taken.
Thank you. And David, if you could...
Yes, as we agree very strongly with the argument my colleague has just made about particularly our concerns about the ageing of the electorate. We did a research report which is summarised in our written evidence showing the ageing of the median potential voter, because the population is getting older. And so it would be a useful way of counterbalancing that to an extent, and therefore compelling politicians to pay more attention to the interests of young voters. And I mean, many of the reasons why we support lowering voting age you will have heard already. Society gives a great many other responsibilities to people at 16. 16-year-olds can be employed and pay taxes on the same terms as adults. So there is a no taxation without representation argument. And also it's the territorial anachronism which has now been created, which my colleagues have already mentioned, whereby people who are 16 and 17 living in England will not be able to vote, but just because they were born in Scotland or in one of the Crown dependencies which allows voting at 16, they will be able to vote, at least in Scotland, in the upcoming referendum election. So for those reasons we support lowering the voting age.
Thank you.
Brandon would like to ask the next question.
This question's for Isabella. You say that it is beyond question that 16 and 17-year-olds are mature enough to vote. However, plenty of people do question this. What evidence do you have for this?
Liberty engages a lot with young people in this country. We regularly go into schools up and down the country to talk to young people about human rights, which necessarily involves the political process. We, through our interactions with young people, are all absolutely convinced that young people increasingly show a huge amount of political awareness and a willingness to want to engage with these issues. So I guess my evidence is perhaps the anecdotal evidence that we have of engaging with young people on these issues. But I think you can see it more widely in society, the kind of campaigns that young people increasingly undertake through online social media activity. Once a year we have a Human Rights Awards ceremony here in London where we recognise the political campaigning work of people promoting human rights. We have a young person's category, and every year we're inundated with different campaigns that young people have undertaken, including those much younger than 16. So we feel very much that there are many people, perhaps even younger than 16, who show the required maturity to be able to vote. We're not suggesting moving the voting age any lower, and as I said, it's always going to be a pretty blunt proxy for maturity, but we feel very confident that at the very least 16-year-olds should be able to vote.
Darren and David, do you agree with what Isabella's just said?
I do. I think that there's no magic maturity that descends on somebody because they turn 18. And you could argue that there are voters who are 36, 46 and 56 who sometimes don't always show great maturity when they're reflecting on how they cast their vote. And some people absent themselves completely from voting by not registering or not turning up. And sometimes that's through a deliberate choice. They don't believe in anything that's on offer. Other times it's because they feel so disillusioned that they're not even aware that an election was on. There was a huge number of voters who were unaware that the recent local and European elections were on when they were polled. So it's not an absolute. It doesn't mean that because we're arguing in favour of votes at 16 that therefore there has been a massive change and every 16 and 17-year-old has the maturity to do this. But I think if you choose an age, you have to accept that there will be some people who are up for it, who are ready for it, who are able to do it. There will be others who aren't. But I'm not sure that that's any different if we chose the age at any particular point when you consider the way that many adults don't engage with politics as well. So. But the people who do raise this, as they often do, as an example of why we shouldn't do it, and they say there's not the understanding or the maturity, I think the answer to that, the counter to that, is to make sure that there is comprehensive political and civic education, or maybe information is a better way of putting it, that's available to younger voters so that they're armed with the information and the knowledge for casting their vote. And that's one of the reasons why we support 16, because otherwise we have, through the secondary school system, the ability to impart this information and knowledge, and then it's not used for maybe 2 years or so. And now that there's a fixed 5-year parliament, if your birthday's at the wrong point, it may be 7 years before you get to use this information and education you've learned. So I accept that it's a concern people raise, and we shouldn't pretend that it isn't, but I don't think that the other side of the argument means that there's some magical maturity that everyone over the age of 18 has, and on reflection and balancing all those things up, for us, it's certainly not a reason to oppose votes at 16.
And I would say I strongly agree with all those points which have just been made, and indeed on the issue of using age as a proxy for competency, which is your competency to vote, which is essentially what it's used for, it is worth saying that there is no subsequent test for competency. You know, if you're below the age of 18, you're assumed to be incompetent of voting, and if you're above the age of 18, you are assumed to be competent of vote. I think the only circumstances in that regard under which you can lose your right to vote are if you're sectioned under the Mental Health Act, which is a similar sort of thing, saying you're no longer of sound mind, as they used to say, to vote. But clearly that's an extremely blunt way of looking at the issue.
And there's an inconsistency between the ages at which society allows young people to do different things. This has been used as an argument both for and against votes at 16. Do you agree that all legal rights and responsibilities of adults should accrue to people at one single age? This is open to anyone.
I don't think that's necessary, no, and I don't think the fact that there are different ages for different rights and duties and obligations is really should be as much concern as those who oppose votes at 16 say that it should. I think, as our answers to the previous question illustrated, there is no magical age at which somebody becomes an adult or has the maturity and competence that we deem adults to have. And for that reason, I think rules should be, rules as regards rights and obligations should be constructed to offer protection to younger people. And sometimes that protection will need to go up to the age of 18, so I'm thinking of child protection policies, while at the same time encouraging them to become active citizens. So I don't think it's inconsistent at all to say that a child should be able to vote at 16 but should still expect some additional protection from the state until they're 18. I think the key comparisons are, as others have said, represent taxation and the obligations that accrue at 16 to pay tax, income tax and other taxes, national insurance, are such that demand at least a parity between those two obligations and rights.
I think in an ideal world, if you were starting to build a new civilization again, you'd try and have a perfect system which was very clean and everything would happen at one age, so there was no confusion. But life's not really like that, and so you have to deal with what you've got. And I think that what we're talking about here is a very positive thing. It's about trying to make democracy broader, more participative, having more people involved, and making a really positive statement about the value that society has for people who are 16 and 17. So that's why why we support the voting age at 16. There are very good health and scientific reasons why it doesn't make sense for people to start drinking alcohol or smoking cigarettes, although on the latter that's something that no one should ever do, until 18. So I think I wouldn't want to see us try and make the big focus a particular qualifying age if that meant we were not able to make the positive statement about democracy. And then we were also running up against some fairly sensible medical and scientific reasons why age of eligibility for some topics is the way it currently is. Just to conclude, that the one area where we would strongly disagree with inconsistency, though, would be if we were trying to set different voting ages for different public elections. And that has happened in some countries where they've said, well, if you're this age you can vote for this particular level of government, but if you're another age you can vote for a different level again. And I think that would be massively confusing for everybody. It's already a struggle to get people on the electoral register and to get them to vote, and it would add a huge layer of complication to try and argue that there should be different ages for different elections. So on that regard, we do believe there just should be one qualifying age, and that should be the age of 16.
Yeah, and I agree with everything, again, both my colleagues have said. If a point which I made in the written evidence I submitted, which often isn't made when people talk about the age at which you can get married and pay taxes and so on, is that England and Wales is unusual in having an age of criminal responsibility which is only 10, which is one of the lowest in Europe. The average for Europe is 14, and it's as high as 16 in Spain and Portugal. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child recommends it should never be less than 12. And this is the age at which a person is assumed to have sufficient mental competency to be tried as fully responsible for their own criminal actions. So in a way, one part of the British statute is saying that young people have an especially high degree of maturity at one age, but that isn't reflected in the voting age and in the ages at which you can do certain other things. I mean, looking at the system, of course, the other point, of course, is the much more widely known point that Britain also has a very low age at which you can join the armed forces, although, as others have said, you can't see active combat until you're 18. But we are one of only 20 countries in the world, I think, which lets people enlist at 16. So that I mean, looking at all the ages at which we allow people to do things, it's extremely complicated, and there may well be arguments, as others have said, particularly on scientific and medical grounds, for not having one single age. But it's important to bear these inconsistencies in mind.
Shaquille has the next question.
Sort of in addition to what Brandon was saying, you should briefly touch on it, David, there. Darren, in your written evidence for the Electoral Society, you said, and you've all kind of mentioned it, the right to marry, join the army, tax, but what would you say to the evidence given by the academics we saw earlier, that these rights are of course limited, you don't pay all tax that 18-year-olds would pay, you have to have consent for marriage, you don't see frontline service in the army, and also there's a range of different rights that are against you, such as jury service, that you can't have when you're 16. So what would you say to combat that?
Sure. Well, I think I'd make 2 points. One would be a broad point. I think for a long time the arguments that you just mentioned were the lead arguments for why the votes at 16 should be brought into effect. And what I think has happened in the last few years has been it's become a much more a bigger picture argument about democracy, about citizens' education, about trying to build an inclusive democracy and to encourage young people and to see young people as being worthy citizens in a democracy, as it were. And I think that those are more about principles and ideas than just running off a shopping list of 4 or 5 things that everyone else can do and vote, but we do those things too and can't vote. So I think at the higher level, I think that it's much more welcome now that rather than just running an argument that basically at the end of it you say it's not fair, instead starting at a much bigger point to say what kind of democracy do we want, what kind of citizens are we trying to bring on board, what should the education system be doing in terms of opening up opportunities for young people. So we certainly welcome that. The second point would be that having seen the debate move much more onto that ground than just the shopping list, then I would say that of course it's correct, with the evidence that you've heard, that they're not full and comprehensive rights, but there's still activities that take place every day in Britain that some 16 and 17-year-olds can do that don't include the right to vote, that other people who do those things also enjoy. So I think maybe those arguments you've heard place those rights maybe more into context, but I don't believe that it destroys the argument or it somehow eliminates the points that have been made in favour of it because there are some qualifications or limitations. I don't think that those points are strong enough to take away from the fact that really we do have to get our democracy into a much more 21st century open, inclusive and informed situation, and I think we're most likely to do that by bringing on board votes at 16.
On a kind of different note, we've received a lot of evidence which suggests that lowering the voting age will make politicians listen more to young people. Why don't they listen more to 18 to 24-year-olds who can vote?
Well, that's an interesting question. I guess that the premise of that is that you think they don't listen to that age group. I'm sure some politicians will say they do, some politicians will say they don't. I think the fundamental point here is that in a representative democracy, it's obvious, and it's difficult to argue with the fact that politicians who are seeking re-election will at some point in their decision-making processes in the time that they're in Parliament reflect on where the votes are. I don't think you'd find many politicians that would disagree with that. I'm not saying that they don't act in the public interest and there aren't other considerations, but it's a basic fact of representative democracy. I think that's one of the many reasons that we should have a more inclusive electorate, who then will have a much greater direct channel to politicians. It's one of the reasons that Liberty is concerned at the exclusion of prisoners currently from the franchise, because it makes it all the more easier to ignore the needs and of prisoners, prison conditions, and other valid concerns about prisoner well-being. So I think it's quite a straightforward point that in a representative democratic system, the goal should be to maximise the franchise as far as possible.
Can I just add to that? In terms of just blunt politics, I've given an answer slightly less theoretical and from some of our other evidence maybe. I mean, in the end, in politics, decisions are made by people who show up. And one of the problems has been that not enough 18 to 24-year-olds register and not enough vote. And that's why organisations like Bite the Ballot have been working so hard to try and register young people and point out to young people that in politics, when decisions are made, they can affect you, and that they run very successful seminars where they're able to show different age groups in the UK and the different services and benefits and opportunities that are available by age, and then they lay over the top of that what the voter turnout is amongst those categories. So voters over the age of 65, the registration rate is well into the 90s. The voter turnout rate is well into the 80s, percentage-wise I'm talking here. But for younger voters, turnout often is below 50%. And so if voters aren't turning up and voting, then there is an argument that politicians aren't going to be as receptive to what their needs are. So now you could be very cynical about that and say that means the whole system doesn't work. Or you could say, well, how do we build it back up again? How do we make sure that young people do feel enthused and inspired to register and to vote, and that their views are taken into account in the political system? And that's led us to the conclusion that one of the many things that needs to happen is for votes at 16 to take place.
Sorry, I'd like to go on to Thea.
We've received evidence about negative attitudes towards young people in society. Do you think this influences people's opinions on whether the voting age should be lowered?
I think certainly negative stereotypes about young people lacking maturity and responsibility may influence the broader society's attitudes towards whether they should have a vote or not. I think that's probably true, unfortunately. But of course, there's a lot of evidence which shows that those kind of stereotypes are really quite inaccurate. As my colleagues have already suggested, and there was a very interesting report a few months ago from the Demos about how politically and socially engaged this generation of young people are, but that they choose to participate in civil society through methods which are not rewarded under the current political system, such as campaigning and online campaigning and grassroots type campaigns and so on. And so one of the beneficial effects of lowering the voting age to 16 could be creating a way of rewarding the people in that age group for their work with civil society through the established political system. But I think unfortunately those stereotypes probably do have an impact.
Yes, we've been concerned for very many years about the demonisation of young children in British society. It's something that you see regularly in national newspapers, you see it in political rhetoric, and it's something that's been even recognised outside of the UK. The Committee on the Rights of the Child, when they last reported, noted with concern the demonisation of children in popular narratives in the UK. So yes, we think that votes at 16 would be, in addition to all the other reasons that we've given you this morning, a great way of helping to try and reverse some of those narratives, as my colleague has just said.
I think it can be very difficult to try and combat perceptions. That's often just the way people see things, and it's reinforced by selected examples that they want to draw on. I think the only thing to really do to counter it is to show what happens in reality. So, for example, in Scotland, there was for people who opposed votes at 16 for the Scottish referendum, it was very easy to cast as being an example of, these will be very easy to influence voters, we'll make sure they see the Braveheart movie and then they'll all come out and vote a certain way. And this was all the commentary that ran at the time. But actually, since the legislation has been passed, what's been really interesting to observe is the way that 16 and 17-year-old voters in Scotland are taking it very, very seriously. And they know that they've got a big decision to make, first a 1 in 300 year decision, and all the sort of the polling data and the evidence that we've seen shows that you've got a group of very eager to be informed constituents who want to weigh up the arguments on both sides, and that's just not only proper research but also anecdotal evidence of that as well. So I think that's a great example of being able to use reality to cast against kind of lazy perception and to be able to really prove the argument that way.
Could I just add one point to that? On public attitudes, there's much made in this debate about votes at 16, about the fact that surveys of the general public seem to indicate that there isn't a majority in favour. I think it's important to note that as we have progressively realised a greater franchise in this country, it has never been driven by those who already can vote. And the idea that you're suddenly going to get a majority of adults saying that 16 and 17-year-olds should have the vote, I think is cloud cuckoo land. That's why we wouldn't support a referendum. We don't routinely have referendums on policy issues here in the UK, and we see no reason why this issue should be one that has a referendum. I think looking back through history and seeing that it's actually been a struggle for people to obtain the vote from different genders and classes, etc. I think the idea that we should base this all on public attitude surveys is really flawed. I think a much better test is to look at the population who would be enfranchised and to see how much they are willing to have the vote, because I think that's an indication of maturity, it's an indication of interest, and that it's much more persuasive that large numbers of 16 and 17-year-olds want to vote than what those older than them think.
Mr Chair, I know we're short on time, but can I just really lend our support to what's been just said there? The idea that you would ask the majority to decide the human and civil rights of the minority by way of a referendum really does run counter to many historical examples where you require leadership on the part of the legislature to protect the minority, not to subject them to the will of majority opinion for people for whom the consequences are absolutely zero, but for the minority for whom the consequences are huge. So we would strongly oppose a referendum on such a matter like this.
Just to note that, as you said, that we are running short on time, so if we could keep our answers as brief as possible, it would be appreciated. For Orson, for the next question, please.
We have had evidence that lowering the voting age to 16 addresses the symptoms and not the causes of political disengagement. How would you respond to this criticism?
I think maybe, as others have said, there's no one quick fix to dealing with voter apathy. But I think that you have to come back to first principles, and voting is a fundamental right. It's not something that should be looked at purely through the prism of encouraging voter apathy, but I think it's hard to argue the premise that enfranchising more people will lead to greater voter turnout, and it will help to instil the voting habit in younger people. So I don't think by any means anyone would argue that it's enough. There needs to be much greater citizenship focus on citizenship teaching in schools. There needs to be much more resource there to prepare people for voting, but it certainly can't harm voter turnout and voter apathy.
I would agree strongly with all those points. I think there are two separate issues here, which is the idea of voting as a right and the impact it would have on the electoral politics. I think those are separate points, and of course nobody ever advocates removing the right to vote from groups who don't vote at the moment, who vote in very low proportion at the moment, to look at it from the opposite way around.
I agree.
How can we channel young people's passion for political issues into voting? Should we? Is it their choice if they don't want to vote?
It absolutely is, and we would wholly oppose the idea of compulsory voting. I think, as we've all reiterated several times already this morning, voting is a right. It's not an absolute right, but it is a fundamental right. It is not an obligation. And you should never create a system, in our view, where there is a punishment for not voting. I think that denotes a very empty view of democracy, the idea that you have to coerce people into voting. I don't think that would bring about healthy democratic renewal at all. It's about encouragement, carrots and not sticks.
It's a completely legitimate right not to take up the opportunity to vote. But I think broader than that, it's not correct just to accept it and do nothing about it. So I think whenever we see voter turnout falling, as we are seeing in the United Kingdom in a big way over the last few decades, it just falls and falls and falls, then that does speak to a need to really rev up politics and rev up democracy and to go back to the principles of why these things are important. So we don't support compulsory voting either, but we're not pedestrian about it. We don't think that means that everything should just carry on as it is, and we think this concept that you're discussing and considering here is just one of many things that needs to happen to breathe new life into the system.
I would agree with all of that, and I just think that in addition to all the many good ideas which we've heard already here, such as improved citizenship education, increasing the number of young people who are registered and so on, that some of the impetus has to come from within the existing political system, because if has also responded to the consultation on voter disengagement in the UK, where some of the MPs who were participating in that made it clear that they thought it was the citizens' choice to vote or not, and that was entirely a matter for them. Whereas we think that politicians should have a role or should have a goal of trying to give themselves as much legitimacy as possible. So they should look to seek legitimacy rather than being unconcerned if large numbers of people aren't voting.
Thank you, Philip.
Do you think the gap between citizenship education, which ends at 16, and the right to vote, which begins at 18, causes political disengagement? We start with David.
Yes, I think it probably does, because as others have said, depending on when your birthday falls, you may have a very long wait between the next when your citizenship education ends and when the next general election takes place. I think that creating a greater connection between when you can vote and when you receive citizenship education would certainly be beneficial, I think.
I agree 100%.
Thank you.
I don't know that it necessarily causes it, but I don't think it helps with the problem we've got. And for voters 18 to 25, voter turnout is less than half. That's a disaster. And we've got to do something about it, and I think that that means using all the tools at the disposal of society, one of which is continued citizenship education. So I'm not sure that it's the cause, but I think it's not helping, and we don't have the luxury of doing things that don't help.
Jack?
We've heard lots of ways of increasing political engagement, but whose responsibility is it to engage with young people about politics?
Well, it's probably a two-way street, isn't it? I mean, in the end, this is an individual right, and so it's up to the individual to take up that right if they want to and do something about it. So there is a degree of personal responsibility here. I don't think we should come before you and say the system doesn't work and it's all the fault of someone else. Of course, it's up to people to take the personal responsibility to look at what the right to vote means and explore it for themselves. But on the other hand, I think that in a system that we have where parties, largely political parties, are seeking votes, it's also up to them to make sure they're running campaigns and writing policies and consulting and listening to a wide range of citizens if they're trying to put together a government that's going to speak for all or as many of the people as Britain as they can get into their particular tent. So I think there's a two-sided obligation, one on the voter, but also on the candidates and on the parties to make sure that they're doing things that are going to spark an interest in people and engage and motivate and inspire.
Yes, I agree with that. I think it's everybody's responsibility, parents, teachers, but also our legislature and our elected politicians. And I think it sends a very dangerous message when 16 and 17-year-olds are asking for the right to vote, and surveys indicate an overwhelming enthusiasm. It's obviously been selected as the topic of your inquiry. It sends a very dangerous message for politicians not to listen to that. And not to engage with young people and consider their request.
I agree completely. It's a two-way street. Some of the impetus has to come from young people themselves, but of course it's interesting that society sees it as its responsibility to educate young people about certain things. Teaching people to read. Certain skills which we feel is an expectation that young people must be taught, but politics and teaching people how to understand our political system it doesn't seem to be part of that core set of competences which we think society has a duty of stewardship to pass on to the next generation, and I think it should be.
Thank you.
So this is a question specifically for Darren.
You say that new technologies provide more information to young people about current affairs than they have received in the past. Are politicians and other people involved in politics using these technologies to engage with young people more?
I think the answer to that question is yes. I think that in a lot of ways, it's very easy to criticise politicians, and there's no end of people who queue up to do so. But in some important ways, it's more easy to communicate with a politician if you really want to than it's ever been before. So most politicians are on Twitter, for example, and you can follow what they have to say, respond to it. Some are very good at responding, and you see a debate or a dialogue that goes on, and that's all using the new technologies that are available. And I think these things are now more readily available than would have been the case, say, 25 years ago, when a very earnest constituent would have to wait until the Hansard report or the speech of the MP came out before they could know what they thought about something. Now they can go on Twitter and know pretty much straight away what they think about the issues of the day. So I think that's a positive thing, and the people who do that well should be congratulated for it.
Joe?
That's another question for Darren. You said that a potential drop in turnout should not be used as an excuse for not tackling political disengagement for the next generation. What would you say to the argument that low turnout among young people shows that they're not ready to vote?
Well, I would not agree with that argument if that was the answer to the whole problem. It may well be that some young voters just don't think they haven't given it enough thought and don't want to vote, but that happens to voters across all age brackets. There are people who don't vote because they start work at a certain time and the queue was too long at their designated polling place, and they carry on. So there's lots of reasons why turnout is low, but I don't think that saying that means that young people aren't interested and therefore we shouldn't expand the franchise is the right conclusion to draw from that. I think the fact that voter turnout is falling across many age groups really just highlights the emergency that's underway to try and re-engage politics with people, because the people haven't changed. It's just that the politics has, and the way politics is conducted has turned off more and more people. I think also because it's a debatable point, but because it's fairly clear that younger people do tend to miss out more when hard decisions are made in government, then that might engender a feeling that, there's just no point. And I think that reinforces why civic education and explaining the power of the vote and making it a very positive experience is one of the things we should do to respond to this voter turnout disaster, rather than say, well, let's just collapse the tent and go home because obviously no one's interested. I think with all these challenges that we face, the response should be not to just do a great critique of it, but also to say, well, what are some of the positive things we can do to try and turn this around, rather than just accept, kind of the managed decline of democracy. I think that would be a really sad thing to do. So I don't agree that we should not be looking to do more just because the evidence shows that voter turnout is dropping. There was very, very low voter turnout in 2001, and then it was higher by 2010. So sometimes it does bounce back a little bit.
Every time we have to move on to the next question.
Sure.
Can I go on to Sadia, if that's okay?
Some of our evidence, especially from Barnsley Youth Council and young people themselves, suggests that there should be more political content in citizenship education. Do you agree with that?
I'm not an expert on citizenship education, but one thing that Liberty has noted with concern is the lack of or the patchy nature of citizenship education on human rights. I understand that the same thing is true of politics teaching from the evidence that I've looked at. We think it's absolutely crucial to build a healthy democracy where citizens and individuals are engaged with the democratic process, to teach politics in school and teach children about our constitutional system, how it's evolved, how government works, how the law interacts, how human rights are protected. We think it's absolutely crucial that there is a solid foundational teaching of this in schools, and we think there needs to be much more.
Keeping responses brief due to shortage of time, would you support teaching politics as a separate subject at school, in school?
Personally, I don't have a particular view on that. I think politics should be taught, but I don't see any reason why that cannot be better integrated into the citizenship module.
I'd like to finally go on to Louise.
What would you like to see added to the citizenship education? What would you like to see added to the citizenship education?
My understanding is that at the moment, under the citizenship module, there is quite a lot of flexibility about what can be taught, and the evidence seems to suggest that increasingly there is a move away from politics teaching. Human rights is also part of the module, but again, there is a huge amount of flexibility, and we understand that the level of teaching in particular classes and schools will often depend on what a particular citizenship teacher might be interested in, what they've been resourced, what they feel confident teaching. We think that's too much flexibility, and that there needs to be a stronger set of core requirements about politics and human rights teaching as part of the module.
I'm not an expert on citizenship education, but I just go back to the point I made earlier, that we feel that an understanding of the political system and why people should vote and how they do it should be a core competency which society passes on to the next education alongside reading and arithmetic and all the other ones which we deem it essential to do so at the moment. So I think that citizenship education should definitely include those things.
We would say that it should be independent and neutral. But for the bits that just can't be, when you're trying to explain what one particular party stands for and why they believe the things they do, then it must be balanced off by making sure that it covers all the parties, so that people can come away and say, well, I heard about 5 different parties and now I know roughly what they do and what they stand for. And the last point would be that we think it should be done taught with great enthusiasm. But these are very, very good things. The historical notions that this is all built on and what it means for day-to-day life in the UK. This is a very positive subject and topic, and it should be something that people are very proud to know about. So we think it should be done in an upbeat way.
Thank you.
Well, apologies for the time constraints that we have. I asked the previous panels that if they were in our shoes, which recommendations they would make in the report. If you have any recommendations, then please feel free to provide more written evidence if you'd like to, and that is the end of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.